Hi, I'm Angie O'Gorman and I work for the Specialist Teaching and Learning Service for Dover. And today I'm going to talk to you about pathological demand avoidance syndrome, otherwise known as PDA. I'm just going to share my screen with you. I'm going to move myself up a little bit so you can see. There we go. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to talk to you about PDA today. And the aims of today's training are for you to gain an overview of PDA and to learn some strategies to support children in your classrooms with PDA. A little bit about the history. PDA was originally discovered by Elizabeth Newson. This happened in the early 1980s. And she found a selection of children with this type of profile. Just to note that you can't get an official diagnosis of PDA. The diagnosis comes under the autism umbrella, and what you tend to get is a diagnosis of autism with a PDA type profile. At present, there's no specific diagnostic tool for PDA, and what you have is various questionnaires that indicate a type of PDA profile. And just to note that the National Autistic Society now recognise PDA as part of the autism spectrum. So characteristics of PDA, number one is that complete obsessive resistance to demands. This can present in various ways. You might see refusal, I'm not doing that. You might see distraction, so the child will try to distract you into doing something else. You'll hear lots of excuses, and often these excuses can be quite clever or can reach into the worlds of physical disabilities, like, oh, I can't do it today, my legs won't work today, or my arms are too sore. You might hear delaying tactics, oh, can't we do it later? Arguing, just because I'm not doing it, and engaging in arguments with you. They might suggest alternatives. Oh, can't I do this? And they might withdraw into kind of a fantasy world. And one of the things I'm going to talk to you about in a bit is using imagination and sort of role play to drawing children into doing activities. But you also need to be wary. I worked with a child with PDA many years ago, and he used to love a program called The Octonauts, and often I would use that and pretend to be one of the Octonauts to draw him into an activity, and that worked to a certain extent. But sometimes if he really didn't want to engage, he would engage in the role play with me and direct me right away from the activity in this fantasy world. So you do need to be careful with that. So often people with PDA are sociable, but they do have those social interaction difficulties underneath, and you perhaps don't see them until you get to know the child, which is often why the diagnosis is often recognised by parents first. So their social interaction skills are often flawed by their inability to see the bigger picture, that lack of boundaries and their complete desire to control everything. And they will often see themselves as above the rules, or on par with the adults in the classroom, and that those rules apply to everyone else but not to them. Excessive mood swings are a feature of PDA. Often those moods change very quickly, and it's triggered by that demand to be in control. PDA children generally very comfortable in role-playing situations and pretending, as I've already mentioned. They loved sometimes to take on the role of the teacher. Often people will say that children with PDA don't have so much of a language delay. And yes, that is true, but often as young children, they've been quite passive and parents have been worried about the lack of development of language, but then it's strikingly caught up, and it's really quick. So it's quite different from the traditional autism, and then they become very, very verbal. Just like with children with a traditional autism profile, you see obsessive behaviour. Like I've mentioned, the child I dealt with who had an obsession with octonauts. However, obsessions can be, and very often are, linked to a particular person. This could be another child in the room, or it could be an adult. You do need to be careful around this, because sometimes this obsession can be quite negative and can make another child feel very uncomfortable. Sometimes it can be more positive, but also sometimes the PDA child can almost be picking at one particular person. It can be quite hard to deal with. Sensory sensitivities are still there, as in the autism profile. Again, they can be over or under sensitive to certain senses. I'm not going to go into that hugely today, because lots of you will already be more familiar with that due to autism training. But again, it can be sight, it can be smell, hearing. So again, things like ear defenders and sensory equipment can be used just as much with PDA children. Again, like the autism umbrella, all children with PDA can have other conditions linked in. ADHD is a common one, dyslexia is common, and dyspraxia. Severe behavioural problems are common with PDA children. They really do have problems controlling their temper because of that need to be in control. But what you've got to try and remember all the time is it's linked to anxiety, and unfortunately the temper can lead to quite violent outbursts in some cases. I'm going to move myself up again so you can see a little bit better. Okay, so often people are liken PDA and ODD. They do present very similar. Elizabeth Newson did a study to compare the two conditions, and I should just say, for those of you that aren't familiar, ODD stands for Oppositional Defiant Disorder. And Elizabeth found that with PDA children, they tended to use more avoidance strategies. They tended to use more social manipulation, in contrast to children with ODD who tended to refuse and be oppositional, but did not use those range of strategies. And in blue there, we've got a description of a PDA child compared to the orange description at the bottom, which is more of an ODD child. So in blue, pupils with PDA are autistic and have difficulties with social interactions, communication and obsessions. They go to extreme levels to avoid demands. They consider themselves adults, even when they are still very much children, and they seem to experience high levels of anxiety and stress. Whereas pupils with ODD do not have significant issues with social interactions, communication and obsessions. They do not show the same level of demand avoidance. They reject demands from authority, but not the demand itself. Whereas with PDA, it is the demand itself more. And they respond better to rewards, people with ODD. That's not to say students with PDA don't respond to rewards. They do, but probably not as much as ODD. And also, just like all of the autistic spectrum, again, PDA children are individuals, and you have to find what works for them. Okay, so just a little chart there showing you how PDA presents differently to children with just that autism profile. So often PDA children will have good eye contact, whereas children with more of just an autism profile tend not to. Again, it varies with individuals. PDA, they can learn to socialise and be very familiar with groups, autism, not so social, more unemotional. PDA children like spontaneity and dislike routine, whereas children with that autism profile love routine and structure, and they find spontaneity really difficult. PDA children may not respond well to rewards all the time. As I said, individual though. They don't like rigid behaviour plans where it's followed set by set every time. You do need to change it up. PDA children often have good imagination, hence the liking of role play and going into fantasy worlds. They often show empathy. Autism, you've got less empathy. I don't like to say a lack of empathy actually with autism, because autistic children do sometimes show bits of empathy, but lack that empathy and social imagination with the traditional autistic profile. PDA children often have really good conversational skills, really good verbally, often very good language. Obviously, children on the autism spectrum, just on that, find reciprocal communication very difficult. And obviously the key factor is the level of how they react to those level of demands. Children with a purely autism profile do struggle with demands, but not on the level of a PDA child. It really is a pathological avoid of demands. I've put this one in because I feel that PDA children are sometimes some of the most difficult children to manage, because as an adult you do have to constantly change up strategies, and sometimes violent outbursts are really difficult to deal with, and sometimes if you're the subject of a person obsession, it can be really, really hard when things are targeted at you. However, this slide really helps us to put it in the perspective of that child. And after you read this, I hope that, you know, on some days you will realise that child is going to push your buttons. And it's on those days that you don't need to be the winner and battle it out to be the boss. It's on those days that you need to think, actually, I'm going to take a step back for this and ask another adult to step in. So we've got a child here and he's saying every day is one demand after another. It isn't that I won't do it, I just can't. Please reduce your demands and expectations of me. I get so angry. And it's not because I don't want to do stuff, it's because I'm having a panic attack. I don't control it, it controls me. Please don't be mad at me. I need you to help me. I just want to be free. You decide everything and I have no choice. Please help me feel free and offer me choices. Why is everyone always trying to control me? I don't understand. Please help me feel in control. I am a child. Imagine I was your child. Wouldn't you want someone to help and understand me? I think that's really important, because sometimes some of the verbal language is very adult-like. But you need to remember, this is a child you're dealing with. Normal everyday demands send me into a state of panic and anxiety, and so I try to avoid them. Please understand that I'm not being awkward or difficult on purpose. I'm so anxious about what others will expect from me that I try and control everyone. I don't want to be bossy. This is my coping mechanism. So I hope that slide really brings home to you what it feels like to have PDA, and on those challenging days, do step away. 2-dial approach. This is a lovely approach and a really good way to look at managing PDA. So basically you think of 2 dials. One dial is the PDA child's anxiety. The other dial is the adult wanting to teach, wanting to introduce some learning and demands. Okay, so the adult's dial should be moving constantly in the opposite direction of the child's. As the child's stress levels rise, so the adult's demands will reduce to 0. as the child becomes comfortable, so the adult can gradually increase the level of their demands. In other words, as a teacher, you must be prepared to take an extremely fluid, personalised and individual approach throughout the day. And that's a really good way of looking at it. Get to know the child. If they're feeling stress, reduce your demands. If they're in a good place, up the demands and get the learning going. So, strategies for PDA in the classroom. As we've touched upon there, we need an individualised, flexible teaching style. And I would use indirect language. So avoid giving, really think about your body language, a calm voice, and avoid those orders, and think about things like, oh, I wonder what's the best way of doing this puzzle. Would you help me with this? Rather than, oh, now let's get on with the puzzle, please. So think about that language. Indirect language is so much more positive for a PDA child than that direct order type language. Try to present choices to the child. Oh, well, we use the green pen for this activity or the blue pen. Oh, shall we do this worksheet? Or are you going to do that one? Obviously, keep those choices within your control. With worksheet activities, a good strategy is to make the one you want the child to do be the easier choice. Because generally, most children will go for the work that's a little bit easier. Yeah, you can involve lots of different choices. Will we sit here to do it? Do you want to work outside? You know, those kind of things. Use a neutral tone and body language. We've touched upon that already. So that child feels less anxiety. And when a child does go into meltdown, really calm language, lots of reassurance, and think of it not as a meltdown, but as a panic attack. This child is having a panic attack. I need to make them feel less anxious. Introduce goals gradually and building on positive experiences. And that links to that dial. Okay, when that child is comfortable, relaxed and working, you can then introduce more goals, more things to do and build up the learning. Some more strategies here. We've linked in with this already. Build a strong relationship. That is crucial. Get to know when that child is getting anxious so that you can reduce your demands. So build a strong, trusting relationship. Stay calm. Be cautious about rewarding success is on there. Sometimes PDA children love praise. Sometimes they don't. And sometimes they see lots of excessive praise as, oh, I'm not doing that again. It's a hard balance to get, but it's almost like they see that excessive praise as, oh, I've obviously given in too easily. So get to know your child, find out what works for them. Be careful with eye contact. Sit alongside or slightly behind the child rather than face to face. Although I've said PDA children generally have good eye contact, you make something feel more like a demand if you're staring directly at them. So just think about your body language. At all costs, avoid confrontation. Take pride in your ability to negotiate and make acceptance more fun for the child rather than wanting to be boss. And using language like, you're not going to win, I'm going to win. It's not about winning, okay? It's about keeping that child calm and enabling them to learn. And appreciate the child's talents. When they have got an interest in something, utilise it, appreciate it and go with it and get some learning out of it. More strategies here. Use of humour is really useful, and I've touched on the idea of role play. It just reduces the demand if humour and role play are in there. For example, with young children, using puppets and getting the puppet to make a request from the child to do something, getting the puppet to whisper you, oh, the puppet's asked me to ask you this, you know, all those kind of strategies really work, but just be careful not to go too down the fantasy line as well. It's all about balance. Absolutely crucial with all our special needs children is that good homeschool liaison, but particularly with PDA children, because it's often the case that if a lot of demands have happened at school, that the child will go home and be quite stressed, or if a lot of demands have happened at home, in school, it will be quite stressy for the child. So we've got to get that balance right, get that communication going. Just some top tips here to remember. Minimise anxiety for that child, get to know them, work out what makes them stress, what doesn't, minimise that anxiety. Sometimes you need to ask yourself, do I need to stick to this timetable? Have we got to do this maths today? If the child's getting really stressed, okay, is there something else we can do? Think about free time as well. We often just think about lessons and learning, but free time is demanding as well, and demands are everywhere. So think about how you can make those free time sessions easier for the child. Use role play, home in on an interest, favourite TV programme. Use those things to help the child cope with demands, and think out the box. With PDA, it's probably the condition that you most have to constantly change up your strategies, make things interesting, make things less stressful, and really make things not seem like demands but fun activities to do. So you really need to be skilled at changing up the strategies. Just some information there where you can get support. PDA Society, of course. The National Autistic Society is the next one there, and the PDA Resource Centre there will help you as well. There's some great information on all those sites. And just to say finally, Maria Herbert is the other specialist teacher for communication and interaction for Dover. So there's her email there. She can help you with PDA questions, and there's my details there as well, should you need any support from STLS. And just to say thank you, I hope you've got something out of that presentation. I hope you've managed to get a bit of background into the condition, how it presents, and that hopefully there's been some useful strategies there for the classroom. But don't hesitate to get in contact if you need support. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen with you. And yeah, just to say goodbye and good luck in the classroom. And on those bad days, do switch adults, okay? PDA is really hard sometimes, and don't go in with wanting to control the situation yourself. Think, oh, I'm finding this difficult today. Can I switch with another adult? That's a really good strategy to use. So just to say good luck with it. Bye-bye.